Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drahon, and welcome back to Pathfinder Hero Frame, where we take a look at the different ancestries within Pathfinder 2nd Edition and see what type of characters we might be able to make using the lore of that ancestry. And today we are looking at the... how do I pronounce this? I've heard Jotunborn, I've heard Jotunborn, like Jotunheim from Norse mythology. You know what? We'll go ahead and call him the Jotunborn. Kind of like Jotunheim. Even though it's a J, but, it kind of makes sense given the context, or I guess lack thereof. The Jotunborn are our first, technically, giant folk. According to their history, the gods had first created the Titans to help them shape the world. But for some reason, the Titans decided to rebel. And so, the gods decided to destroy most of these Titans. And from their remains, the gods decided to create the Jotunborn. And instead of giving them the full power of the Titans, they only gave them a small scrap, allowing them to basically have the powers of creation. At least very minor powers of creation. And so the Jotunborn were tasked with helping shape the world, much like the Titans were. And when they were done, there was not really a use for them. So the gods created a space for them to live. And to sort of explain what's going on here, we need to talk about the ethereal plane to better explain this little pocket in reality that the Jotunborn now inhabit. The ethereal plane overlaps all inner planes, giving it the nickname the space between spaces. That name sounds familiar, and it probably should. It is a name given to a designated area described in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I won't go any further into that. It's probably going to be a video in of itself. But other nicknames that the ethereal plane has been given are the plane of dreams and the ghost world, since it houses the lost souls who have ignored the pull of the River of Souls. And yeah, the Plane of Dreams was a nickname given to the astral plane over in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, so there's another little difference between the two RPG systems. Just enough of a difference to say that it is different. But honestly, having the Plane of Dreams in the ethereal makes a little bit more sense than the astral. Another thing that the ethereal plane seems to be known for is that it hosts emotional forces relevant to psychic magic. Interesting. The ethereal plane seems to have been formed by traversal forces between the Creation's Forge and the Void. So that's something. This kind of is a in between the mortal realms and the netherworld, in a way. Somewhat. But speaking of in between, there is actually an in between the ethereal plane and the mortal realms, also known as the universe. This is called the Fray, a subplanar realm. This is the home of the Jotunborn. and serves as a resting place when they are not required within the universe proper. There have been times when the Jotunborn have been called to the mortal realm, and that is after certain disasters. For example, one of the more recent events that called them to the mortal realm was Earthfall. But they were only there for a short while. They helped clean up some of the messes that were made, and then they went back to the fray. The most recent was God's Reign, when Gorum was slain. And so the Jotunborn came to the universe. However, something went wrong. Something about the God's Reign has stopped the Jotunborn from returning to the fray, or at least made things a lot more difficult for them. So they're sort of stranded here for the time being. Sure, the Jotunborn could find a way to go back to the fray from using some form of interdimensional travel, but that seems to be, like I said, rather difficult. Whether someone's being rather greedy or for other nefarious purposes, the Jotunborn are unable to use those methods. So now they're here, probably to stay, though some of them are probably looking for ways to return to the fray, which is where our Jotunborn will come in. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the ancestry we have in Battlecry. The Jotunborn have the following heritages: Keeper Jotunborn, Plain Hopper Jotunborn, Sage Jotunborn, Warrior Jotunborn, and Weaver Jotunborn. For backgrounds, it is recommended in Battlecry to use the Guard, Nomad, Scout, and Weaver. However, it is somewhat implied the background of the Distant Traveler and the Otherworldly Mission are also recommended. It's not outright stated, but given that they are from the fray, Distant Traveler makes sense. And they're only ever in the universe when they are given an otherworldly mission. So yeah, it's sort of implied that these two backgrounds are here. Other backgrounds that I personally would recommend are the Animal Wrangler, the Astrological Augur, Beast Seeker, Dragon Scholar, Kaiju Stalker, Militia Member, Megafauna Hunter, Portal Scholar, Stargazer, Star Watcher, Silk Farmer, Sleepless Sun's Star, Warrior, and Winter's Child. Now, two of these are kind of stand-outish, the Silk Farmer and the Animal Wrangler. This is because one of the notable features of the Jotunborn is their, I guess, tattoos. These tattoos aren't made of ink. They are made with a special silk formed from insects called Ivalar? Just little horseshoe crab-looking things. And they use this silk to basically tattoo their bodies. They weave it into their own skin, which is how they're able to give off dim light. It's from this silk. So those two backgrounds are explained away by that. Dragon Scholar, Kaiju Stalker, and the Megafauna Hunter are more for the fact that they themselves are a large ancestry. And them facing off against larger creatures like dragons is more of a reference to Dungeons and Dragons lore than it is Pathfinder lore, since the Jotunborn are more or less Pathfinder's version of the Goliath. For classes, it is recommended by Battlecry to have a Barbarian, Champion, Druid, Fighter, Guardian, Monk, Ranger, Sorcerer, specifically of the Occult variety, Summoner, or Witch as your classes for a Jotunborn. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and take a deeper look into each of these classes to see what the lore might say about their subclasses. We're going to skip over the Alchemist, as while yes, you could have a Jotunborn who takes up the Chirurgeon, I didn't really see much of a need for a Jotunborn to take up Alchemy. So I instead decided to start things off with the Animist, with the apparitions of the Crafter in the Vault, Echo of Lost Moments, and Witness to Ancient Battles. Moving on to the Barbarian, I only saw 2 instincts that made sense for the Jotunborn, other than Fury, which can technically be put in any character that is a barbarian, doesn't matter what their ancestry is. For the barbarian Jotunborn, I would recommend the instincts of the giant, given their origins as scraps of titans. And then I recommend the spirit, given their connection to the ethereal plane. Or I guess I should say the in-between, the fray. Moving on to the Bard. Yes, this is one of those niche classes. You probably won't have too many Jotunborn bards. They probably be similar to Mongolian throat singers, or maybe they would just be humming. Sort of a whistle while you work sort of deal. Maybe they do drums? I don't know. But a Jotunborn bard would probably take on the muse of the warrior. A warrior Jotunborn with the warrior background taking up the bard with the warrior muse. That's a lot of warrior. Anywho, let's move on to the champion. I would recommend either grandeur or obedience for most of your Jotunborn, though you could technically go for any of the causes. I don't see too many evil Jotunborn. Maybe there is some form of hatred from the Titans that lingers within the Jotunborn, though I think this would be very, very rare. Probably 1 Jotunborn for every 10 or so clans, which each clan is roughly 100 Jotunborn. So yeah, it's going to be very much rare for there to be an evil Jotunborn, but it could reasonably happen. Moving on to the Cleric. It was mentioned that Desna is a possible deity for the Jotunborn to serve, but since every single god had a hand to play in the Jotunborn's creation way back in the day, it's safe to assume that any deity could be a possible focal point for a Jotunborn cleric. However, there are 2 deities that I think would make the most sense for a Jotunborn, and that would be Pharasma, given the nature of the ethereal plane, and Torag, since he is the Forge father. But yeah, not much else. really stood out. I almost picked Gorum, but then I remembered that he's kind of the reason the gods reign is a thing. He's dead. So there's that. But it's still something to think about. Maybe an exemplar who managed to find a drop of the dead god's blood that supposedly rained down from the heavens. That could be interesting. Moving on to the Druid. There are three Druidic orders that I would recommend, and that is the Cultivation, Stone, and Storm orders. Stone and Storm are more of a reference to the different types of giants, while Cultivation is more of the Jotunborn's job when they were first created. Moving on to the Gunslinger. Again, I don't see many Jotunborn taking up the Gunslinger. This is just one of those classes that's there to be there, and besides, imagine a giant carrying around a gigantic firearm. For your ways, I do recommend the Drifter since they are a nomadic clan. Triggerbrand would also make sense, but I think the Vanguard would be more common. Being able to take down large structures, tear down the walls of evil organizations, so on and so forth. Moving on to the Magus. For your hybrid studies, I would recommend either the Inexorable Iron or the Twisting Tree. And none of the others really fit too well, just these two. Moving on to the Oracle. This one I think would be more common amongst the Jotunborn. For your mysteries, I think Ancestors, Battle, Bones, and Life would be pretty common, though Ancestors and Battle probably more so. Moving on to the Psychic. This is just a reference to the ethereal plane housing psychic powers, or at least the innate magical potential for psychic powers. And since the Fray is closer to the ethereal plane than the universe is, I think there is a chance that there are going to be more psychic Jotunborn than any other ancestry, besides the few times that I have mentioned psychics in the past. For your conscious mind, I recommend the Tangible Dream and the Unbound Step. For your subconscious mind, I recommend Emotional Acceptance and Precise Discipline. Moving on to the Rogue, I recommend the rackets of the Avenger and the Ruffian. Nothing else really fit, just those two. Moving on to the Sorcerer. Psychopomp is the first one I would recommend, once again referring to how the Fray is closer to the ethereal than the mortal plane is. And so there's a good chance that Jotunborn will come across the occasional lost soul within the boundaries of the Fray, or probably even passing by the Fray. So there's a slim chance of that happening. Now for the actual bloodlines that would probably work best for the Jotunborn, again, we need to talk about the occult bloodlines, because for some reason, Battlecry specified that the only bloodlines to fit the Jotunborn are those of the occult spell list. And there aren't that many. There's the Aberrant, the Occult Draconic Bloodline, the Hag, the Horror, and the Shadow. I don't recommend Hag, as the Jotunborn don't seem to have any interactions with Hags. And it doesn't seem likely that there would be any draconic bloodline sorcerers of the Jotunborn, unless you're looking to recreate the Urda from Dragonlance. Again, not really something that could be feasible, but yeah, it's a niche reference. Aberrant doesn't seem likely either. So maybe the Horror and the Shadow are going to be the more common of the two occult bloodlines, or perhaps another occult bloodline is coming up that has not been released yet. Who knows? And finally, we have the Witch. This one's interesting. I wasn't exactly sure what patron themes could fit the Jotunborn. Honestly, I didn't see much of a connection. But, the patron themes that I think might fit: Spinner of Threads, Starless Shadow, and the Inscribed One. These are the closest ones that I could find. Spinner of Threads, going back to the the Eval, the crab bugs that they harvest. That's a very niche reference, but that's the only thing that seems to fit. On the Inscribed One, that's kind of a reference to rune magic in a way, though I didn't put wizard down. I probably should have, but I just forgot to. It didn't recommend it, so it wasn't on my mind. Though, if I had to take a guess, I would say universal magic would be useful for the Jotunborn. Maybe even some form of war magic? I just don't remember them off the top of my head. But with that being said, what do you think of the Jotunborn? I will say, if you're going for a deity, there could be a reference to Norse mythology there, probably put in a Norse god. There aren't any listed in the deities list for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, despite the Egyptian gods being listed, which I found a little bit confusing. But what do you think? What type of Jotunborn would you create? Let me know in the comment section down below. And until next time, this has been Drayhan, and I am offline.